A ban of social media for those under the age of 16 has passed in Australia. It's a landmark bill, and I spoke to Leonardo Puglisi, the chief anchor and founder of 6 News Australia, a news organization run primarily by teen journalists. Take a look. Kind of talk to me about how this ban actually came to fruition.
Yeah, so this has been discussed for almost a year now. It's kind of dragged on and on. There's been some proposals about it. There's certainly been ongoing discussion about potential harms on social media for all ages, including of course young people. And then there have been some campaigns that have been started by this. The Prime Minister Anthony Albanese came out and publicly backed one of them, and then it's kind of gone on from there. It initially started at the state level. One of our South Australian premier kind of came up with it, and it's kind of spiraled from there. There's been some media campaigns about it. News Corp has had some campaigns about it on their front pages nationwide. So certainly, it's been part of an ongoing discussion, and really, it's just more so developed because to be a cynic, there's very little time in Parliament. Like yesterday was the last sitting day, so they've been trying to rush it. And certainly, it's been part of an ongoing debate, but as we'll get into, I just don't think it's the right approach.
You've interviewed Prime Minister Albanese before, and he's aware of the work that you all at Six News do, lots of teen journalists. And so, how does this play into Six News's efforts? Of course, you're 17, but I know there are some journalists that work for your organization that may also be impacted by this.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So we put out a statement about a minute ago, and we've said that we're going absolutely nowhere. This does limit our ability to grow. Been able to grow because 13, 14, 15-year-olds have seen our work and joined, and they're able to explore their passions in media and in journalism. But I'm not going anywhere. We have a 15-year-old election reporter, for instance, so that does make things hard. And some of our audience, especially on Instagram and TikTok, are also in the affected ages. Not a majority at all, but certainly a decent amount. So it does affect things for us. We are Australia's and quite possibly the world's only national streaming news channel, 24/7, run entirely or majority by teenagers in high school. So it does make things a bit more difficult for us. It does make things a bit more unique, but I'm glad that I'm still able to be there and I've made that cut off.
And this is something we started to have as a conversation quite recently, which is social media, the harms that it presents, also the benefits that it presents. And so, what has been the argument for this social media ban? And I know that mental health has been a huge part of it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So it's been about mental health. It's been about then the government's used the line giving parents control, which I mean, there's only so much you're doing it because there's no parental exemptions under this ban. But certainly, there's been a lot of talk about mental health, keeping kids safe, making it easier for parents to say you can't use social media. Sorry, it's illegal. Whether that would work or not, and look, that's really been for it. On the against side, it's been a multitude of reasons, including unable to enforce, whether it's some form of digital ID, doesn't account for vulnerable kids who use social media, maybe as an escape. Maybe they have a tough home life or a social life and they use social media for a really important reason. Doesn't account for creativity that a lot of young people express online, and also just doesn't give control to the parents, as I mentioned before, in many cases. So it's been an interesting debate. I think, in the past fortnight, especially, there's been a lot of concern about how it's being rushed. There were 30 bills pushed through the Senate yesterday, just about on the last sitting day of the year, which is extraordinary. And so I think that started to present as a real concern. But of course, it's coming in another 12 months. So who knows what could happen by then? We've got an election next year. So for all we know, the government could be changed by then.
For sure. And social media companies, as you mentioned, they're being given this 1 year period in order to prepare for this ban to go into effect. Do we have an early indicator as to how social media companies are expected to handle this? Because this law is a first, really, in the world.
Yeah, it is. I think that's been an issue that we don't exactly know how it would be enforced. Platforms like Meta, for instance, put out a statement where they mentioned that if every Australian has to use ID, this would be an inconvenient process. It wouldn't be practical, which I think is true. And then other platforms are maybe going to explore facial recognition. But we'll wait and see. I think I'm not saying it will happen, but a couple of years ago, Facebook pulled all news in Australia, just banned news on Facebook. And not saying it would happen, but I wouldn't be entirely shocked if they kind of went the nuclear option, just withdrew because it was from Australia's market because it was just too hard to enforce. If there's no ID that's going to be required, then I really struggle to see how it could be put in, unless you're doing facial recognition, which I think has its own clear problems. And look, it doesn't apply for everyone. The reality is, I have been, some people have called me 12 and others have called me 21. So I don't think facial recognition is necessarily going to work. So it's really up in the air at the moment about enforcement.
Yeah, and looking at this from a culture perspective, I mean, social media is really driven by the younger generations. I mean, obviously, plenty of adults use it, but you're now going to have the possibility of a lot of young people not having access to social media. So, how do you see that playing into what Instagram, Facebook, X look like in the future?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, to be honest, I think young people are going to bypass this and it won't make much of a difference anyway. But look, certainly, on a platform like TikTok and Instagram, especially, less so Facebook and Twitter, young people are driving a lot of conversations on there. They're users of it. Again, certainly not a majority. There's only so many 13 to 15-year-olds in Australia. But, whether it changes things or not. I mean, it's hard because again, I think they'll still be able to be on it. But the reality is, there's a lot of platforms that are built up on having young people's following and support. And it's where young people get their news and their sport and their entertainment from these days, not from TV or radio or newspapers. So I think that's going to make things a bit difficult for young people. But I think in general, a lot of these any creators who have an audience around this age, again, I still think they're going to be fine because I really don't think it's going to be enforceable. And certainly, YouTube is exempt, which is good. They were initially saying it was going to be included. They backed down on that. But look, it is going to be interesting. And with another 12 months, any 15-year-old today is going to be allowed under it anyway. So it's really for the next generation, I think. And it's weird saying that while still in Gen Z talking about the next generation, but certainly the impacts of on Gen Alpha and the like will be ones to particularly watch. Although I think some of Gen Alpha would actually be 13 at the moment anyway. So
One part of this, though, that I'm glad you touched on, and I want to talk about before I let you go, is the YouTube exemption, which is pretty notable. Why do you think YouTube may have been left out of other social media apps? I know it operates differently as a social media platform, but what could be the possibility, the reason for it being exempt?
Yeah, I think it was some of the backlash that came to them initially saying it would likely be included. Look, the reality is YouTube is used in schools, it's used for entertainment, it's used for young kids. There's obviously YouTube Kids, the platform. Of course, that's not for 13, 14-year-olds. But certainly I think there's been a lot of backlash. As you mentioned there, right? YouTube is not the same as Twitter or Instagram. In fact, only so many even consider it social media. Like when on Six News we talk about social media, we say follow us on social media. We mention like Facebook, Instagram, etc. And then you watch us on YouTube. We treat YouTube almost like television because that's how widespread it is, and that's because it is just such a widespread platform. So I think some of that backlash contributed to that. We had the Wiggles, the children's group here, come out and raise concerns about it, which may have worked. I certainly raised concerns about this, but I think some of the backlash there, I'm glad they backed down on it. But it's really pointed to a big problem with this legislation is this back and forth on what platforms. Snapchat was initially exempt because they were classifying it as messaging. Now they're going to include it. I don't think we've actually seen specifics about like Discord, which you can say sure is considered messaging, but Discord also has a lot of its own problems. And so I think that's really been an issue. But I'm glad YouTube is exempt, certainly. And I think, yeah, it was definitely kind of a bit of public reaction. And I would like to hope some reconsideration when and the government actually looks at how big YouTube is. I mean, you can literally watch anything on it. That is how important it is for people's daily lives and certainly for school.